Good afternoon, everyone. This is Adam Haroon from Branding MD. I hope you're all having a great start to your Tuesday so far. And I am so excited because today is the first day of our June marketing jumpstart. I know summer for many practices can be a slower time, and so it's really a great opportunity to see where we can do something in a new way or how we can leverage, an approach that we haven't used previously to really drive patient traffic and grow our practices. And it's also a great time to focus on the internal things happening in your practice. So I'm really glad to have all of you here with me and very excited to be sharing some content that I think you're going to find very, very actionable today. So I guess to begin, let's start by talking about what it is we're going to cover today. We're going to be covering what most aesthetic practices do wrong when they're planning their marketing and what you can do instead. We're going to talk about the three phases that comprise your marketing plan and its success. We're going to talk about which marketing tactics, which channels, and which strategies you can use in each phase of your practice's marketing plan, and how to really create a strategic marketing calendar. So, a lot to cover, and I'm very, very excited. Now, I know some of you may know me, and others of you may have never met me before. I know a lot of people may have heard of this through LinkedIn or through perhaps on Instagram or through a digital marketing company. So I'll give you a quick brief on who's exactly talking to you today. And my name is Adam Haroon. Once again, I'm the managing director at Branding MD. We are a strategic marketing firm that works exclusively with aesthetic practices, and I've had the pleasure of doing some very, very cool things since I started this company. I've had the pleasure of speaking for numerous companies. Actually, next week I'm flying out to speak for Allergan at their national sales meeting in Napa Valley. I've also spoken for them in Europe. I frequently speak for Mertz. I've spoken for BTL in the past, and I've also had the pleasure of working with many, many other thought leaders and KOLs in the aesthetic space at many, many industry events where I'm speaker. So, like I said, some of you may know me, some of you may not, but I'm certainly glad to have all of you here. So lots to cover today. And before I get started, I do just want to mention that I am a marketer and not a magician. So unfortunately, there is no silver bullet that is going to bring a stampede of 1,000 patients through your door tomorrow morning. But what I do have for you are some very proven best practices that have really created results for our clients in numerous geographic markets and practices of all sizes. And these are timeless principles. So these are not going to be things that exist today and tomorrow don't work anymore. So I want to be giving you time tested, proven best practices to distinguish your practice and market more effectively. So if you're looking for that, you're in the right place. If you're looking for a magic show, I'm sorry, but nothing to offer you today. But what I do have to offer you is a gift, actually. I have written a book. It's called Now the Patient Will See You, and it's a really great guide to building strategic marketing for your practice. Now, you can feel free to go ahead and buy that on Amazon for $18.97, or you can stay till the end of the webinar today, and I'll be happy to share with you how you can get that free of charge. So I'll be glad to share directions on how to get that later today, and I'll also be sharing a copy of our slides. So make sure you stay until the end today. But that being said, let's dive in. Let's talk about how we can jumpstart your marketing, how we can really get you marketing more effectively. So, to start, I'd love to kind of ask all of you a question. And that would be if you'd agree that our industry is crowded, right? We've got new competitors in different markets popping up every single day. And the industry is really becoming much, much more of a competitive space than it was 10 or even 5 years ago. So I want to share a stat with you on this from the ASDS, the American Society of Dermatologic Surgery. And this is that in their annual customer survey, 50% of patients ranked price as their primary buying criteria when they were seeking out aesthetic procedures. So it wasn't the provider's credentials, it was not the location of the practice, it was not the product or injectable or device being used, it was price, right? And that's kind of a scary situation because we've almost found ourselves now in an industry where patients are more particular about who is doing their hair than who is doing their aesthetic procedures, right? If people, are looking for a new stylist, they want to read online reviews, they want to, ask their friends about this place, they want to look at the Instagram. They're very, very good at doing their due diligence with their hair. But if they see an ad for like, $8 unit neurotoxin or something like that, they will go running without a second thought towards that practice. So it's really a tricky situation, and it leaves us with what I refer to as a disconnect in our industry. So when I say a disconnect, what I mean is that we have so many remarkably talented providers, exceptionally skilled physicians and healthcare practitioners, but they are either not well versed in marketing or they aren't comfortable marketing. So ultimately, they get lost in the noise of the industry. However, on the other side of the spectrum, we have far too many practices that are really mediocre at best. And even though they may not have the patient's best interest at heart, they're ultimately very, very adept at marketing. So they get the patient's attention, they get the patient traffic. At best, patients are dissatisfied, and at worst, they're left with some very bad complications, right? So this is a disconnect that I'm very, very resolute about resolving, and I am on a mission to equip great physicians with great marketing. So that's what we're here to do today, and I'm really excited to have all of you really ready to dive into this content. So that's kind of where we find ourselves. But the question really should be, if we know 50% of patients are looking at price as their number one criteria, how do we switch that trend? How do we make sure that we aren't competing on price? So, an example that I think illustrates this quite beautifully is the following, right? In every industry, we have commodities. And here are just three examples of three commodity products, right? A cup of coffee, a white polo shirt, and a glass of water, right? So water, I mean, water is practically free. I'm sure many of you have a tap within, a few steps distance of you right now. So that's one example. If you were to go to a department store and look to buy a white polo shirt, that might be, 30, 40, maybe $50, right? And coffee, if you're making that at home with your machine, or even going to just a cafe to get that, that's maybe $1, $2 at most, right? So commodity products. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have brands, right? So when you add a brand to the equation, all of a sudden that price conversation changes quite substantially. So to use some examples from my previous slide, right? When you add that Starbucks logo, that $1 or $2 cup of coffee is now, $3, $4, $5, maybe more if you're getting really fancy with it, right? If you look at that polo shirt, we add a Nike check mark or my personal favorite, the Lacoste alligator, to that same shirt. And suddenly it goes from being 30, 40, or $50 to 100 or $150, right? And finally, my favorite example is water, right? My personal favorite is Evian, so I used that today. But we cannot get a much more commoditized product than H2O. Yes, some brands might have a slightly different mineral content than others, but ultimately it's all water, right? And if you go to any supermarket, you will see shelves upon shelves of different brands of water, and they all sell really well, right? So this is a perfect example of how really becoming a brand and marketing yourself as such can completely change the conversation when it comes to talking about the pricing for your different procedures and treatments. So I wanted to keep that in mind through all of our conversations today. So the next thing I want you to understand as we look at how you're marketing your practice is that we are ultimately marketing and selling value, right? Yes, we all have what we call our offered products, right? That is, a neurotoxin, that is a CO2 laser, all of this. But then we actually have what we're really selling, right? This is the outcome of all of these different procedures and treatments, right? That is ultimately what the customer and the patient is looking for, right? Consumer psychology studies tell us that consumers make purchasing decisions based on emotion and justify those purchase decisions with facts later down the road, right? So, and this can happen in a matter of split seconds, but that's how consumer psychology has been established to work. So, we know that ultimately a patient is calling your practice and coming in for a procedure because they have some kind of outcome they want, whether it's getting rid of wrinkles on their forehead, whether it's acne scars, whether they're just tired of looking tired. Ultimately, they are buying an outcome, right? They're not buying a particular product or a particular procedure, although of course they need to understand what's happening from a procedure standpoint to get them to that outcome they want. So I'd love for all of you to keep this in mind as well, because this is something we're going to revisit several times during our content today. So just start by asking yourself, at your practice, what are you really selling, right? any practice can offer the same laser, any practice can offer the same neurotoxin or injectable, but what are you really selling that other practices can't touch, right? It's your technique. It is your approach to aesthetics. It is your skills and training. These are all things that you're really selling. And so it becomes a question of how do we eloquently express that to people? And that's something we're going to touch on briefly today, but it's also something we're going to talk about in great detail over the next 8 days as part of our June marketing jumpstart. So be sure to keep this in mind as well. Again, this is just another way of thinking about how you're really selling value, right? Every procedure and treatment you offer has a benefit to it, right? That's why patients come and get it. There's also a cost to that treatment or procedure, right? And the difference between the perceived benefit and the cost is the perceived value to the patient, right? So when we can market ourselves in such a way that our perceived value exceeds that of the cost of any treatment or procedure, we're able to really break down price resistance quite beautifully, right? So if we were to put that as an equation, right, benefits minus costs equals value. Another way to think about this is what I call the benefit gap, right? Every patient, no matter what they're coming through your doors for, has their current situation and how they look right now and where they want to be, right? The difference between those two things is the value to the buyer, right? So that's another great way of looking at this same concept. But what I really want you to understand is, again, you're not selling any one particular treatment or procedure. Ultimately, you're selling the value that that particular treatment or procedure offers. So really important to keep this in mind as we begin to talk about marketing strategically. So that being said, how do we market strategically, right? I really want to give you some key insights and some very actionable information. We are on a bit of a time constraint today, so I can't go into a full-blown marketing plan for you, but I want to make sure you all have the keys to take this and really work with your staff and your team to build your marketing plan in detail. So the first thing I want you to consider is your marketing a Monet or a Mondrian, right? And I don't know if we have any art aficionados watching this webinar, but on the left, we have the London Fog by Monet, and on the right, we have a Mondrian. Now, most practices, I like to call them a Monet, right? You can kind of see what's happening, but the closer you look, it's really quite distorted and blurry. There's some structure, but I mean, it's kind of a mess. There's something going on, but not really. This is how most practices market, right? It's all done by happenstance and very haphazard. So that's where most practices find ourselves. On the right side, however, we have a Mondrian, right? Everything has a rhyme and reason. Everything is very clear, very orderly, very sequential, right? So, of course, this is planet Earth and nothing here is perfect, but we really want to move you away from marketing in a very haphazard way of just doing stuff because another practice is, or because you think that's what is working based on what you're seeing other people do, or because, you think that could work. There's no real reason behind it. We want to be much more strategic and delineated and really much more clear in how we go about your marketing. And so the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly how we can do that. So here's how most practices and frankly, most marketing companies in this space really approach marketing. And I want to talk to you about a better way. We call this at our company the aesthetic accelerator way, based on our own processes and way of doing things. But let's begin. So most practices do little to no market research before they go about their marketing, or frankly, even open their practice, right? They think there's, opportunity and that's enough market research for them. So there's no market research done, no real insight into their patient base or their geographic competitor landscape, none of that. It's kind of just, let's roll. And then there's no real thought to strategy or how you're going to distinguish your practice. It's just kind of a matter of maybe thinking about it with your staff briefly, maybe tossing a few ideas around, and then saying, hey, let's give this a try, right? Then most practices spend the vast majority of their time implementing tactics, right? So whether that is blogging and search engine optimization, whether that is Facebook ads, whether that is a referral program, maybe you're doing an event in the community, maybe you're trying to work with influencers and doing a lot of social media and Instagram, right? Maybe you're sending out postcards by direct mail, maybe it's radio ads. Perhaps you've purchased a billboard or some magazine advertising. It could be any number of things, but again, you're kind of just throwing mud at the wall and seeing what sticks. There's no real thought or strategy behind which actual tactics you're implementing. So again, you end up doing a whole bunch of stuff, and it's very exhausting because you're trying to do 20 things at once, and they're all really quite half-baked, right? So that's the most frustrating part for a lot of practices, this whole tactical phase. And if you're doing enough marketing activity, you surely are going to get some level of traction, right? But I would imagine for many of you, the quality of prospects coming through your doors, especially with some of your digital efforts, possibly, might not be the right kind of candidates for the procedures and treatments you offer, right? Maybe they just either aren't a fit. Maybe they don't know what they need and they have unrealistic expectations. Maybe their budget is too low, right? Or maybe they just aren't a fit for, what you're looking to provide, right? And they're seeking an outcome that you don't feel comfortable offering them. It could be some or all of these things, but ultimately you end up with very, very kind of sporadic quality of leads and sporadic traffic. And, yes, there's traction there, but it's kind of a mess. And ultimately that reflects on your bottom line. So you find yourself quite frustrated, either being left to your own devices and trying it yourself, or with whatever marketing company you may have engaged. So you ultimately either decide to fire your marketing company and hire a new one, or bring on some help from a marketing company that's solely focused on tactics, right? And so ultimately what happens next is that whole process starts itself over again, over and over and over, and it's really something of a hamster wheel. And that's why so many practices find themselves very jaded and frustrated when it comes to planning their marketing. So that is the typical and very erratic way of doing things. I would like to encourage you to take a step back and think very differently about how you're going to go about your marketing, right? So the first thing is, if you want to market effectively, you need to have market research and solid data behind you, right? Based on who your audience is and your competitor landscape, right? You need to give thought to that. So that way, we're actually doing things from a place of data, and we're doing things with intention rather than kind of just guesswork, right? So that is first and foremost it's kind of a boring step, to be honest with you, but it's the most important step to take in any marketing plan. Next, we want to devote substantial time to really creating a strategy based on our research, right? How do we distinguish your practice? What is our positioning? What are the right marketing channels based on who our audience is, who your practice is in terms of structure and staff, based on your marketing budget, based on, what geographic market you're in? Because what I might do for a client in Los Angeles is going to be radically different than what I might do for a client, somewhere in a small town in, the Midwest of the United States, which is going to be radically different than a Canadian client or a client I have in Europe, right? So there needs to be strategic action taking, right? We're not just blindly going about doing tactics and hoping they work, right? Strategic thinking is so, so key. Once we have a strategy in place, yes, then it's time to execute. But we don't just want to, again, try stuff and kind of feel like it worked, or like, yeah, we think we've seen more patients coming in from this, right? That's not what we want to do. We want to implement and analyze everything we implement so that we have, again, hard information and hard data behind us to then refine any campaign or channel accordingly, whether we choose to increase a budget, decrease a budget, add something new, reduce it, right? That all needs to be based on analytics. So that's why we're not just being tactical, we're analyzing and refining based on what we implement and the results we see accordingly. Then from there, once we do all of this makes sure that when we get patients into the practice, first of all, not only are they more qualified patients because we've done things in a strategic way and there's a lot less resistance from the end of a prospective patient, but also we put things in place to really automate different elements of your sales process, right? Different elements of your sales and patient education can really be streamlined either digitally or through, the right processes internally, so that, it's not a sporadic case of whether or not your consultations convert to booked procedures and treatments, right? I always say random actions get random results. So the more we can do to leverage systems and automate your sales processes, the more we can do to make sure you're converting more of those leads that are coming into your practice. And then Finally, once all that is done and once all of that is running smoothly, we can expand, we can grow your ad budget, we can add new marketing channels should that make sense for your practice. So again, it's all just much, much more sequential, much, much more elevated in terms of the way we're thinking about things, right? So this is what we call the aesthetic accelerator way. This is based on our own proprietary processes, and it's a way of going about things I would highly encourage you and your practice staff to consider implementing as well. So just a little comparison there between being erratic and having a lot more strategy and intention to your marketing. Another thing, kind of based on what I talked about just a moment ago, is you always want to have quantifiable objectives. And to the best of your ability, based on the data and analytics at your disposal, you really want to work backwards, right? So let's just use this as an example. If your goal is $50,000 in additional sales over the next 30 days, based on your conversion rate, you can then say, okay, it would take us 200 consults to get there, right? And if you have the right web analytics, you can say for 200 consults, it's going to take us 1,000 website visits. And by the way, these are all completely arbitrary numbers. Okay, so if you know you need 1,000 website visits, how many ad impressions or how many Facebook followers or Instagram followers do you need to get that many views to your website, right? So again, thinking backwards in a sense is so much easier when you have the right information, data, and analytics behind you. But even if you can just begin to leverage some analytics in your decision making and in setting quantifiable objectives, it's going to make everything flow that much more smoothly, right? We don't ever want to say, okay, we're going to go blow $1,000 on a Facebook campaign and see what happens, right? We want to base everything on a quantifiable objective in your practice. So that's a really, really key element as well. Now, we want to look at our buyer's journey, our patient's journey in kind of three phases, right? So the first is attract. And attract is where we are doing all of this activity, right? Whether it is, Facebook ads or a referral program or, a billboard or radio ads or social media or working with influencers, whatever marketing channels you use in your practice. And in a future webinar, I'm going to go through each of those channels in detail, but today I just want to outline the three phases for you. We're doing all this activity to do one of two things. People are either going to go to our website and provide their information, or they're going to call the practice, right? And once they do that, we want to capture their contact info so they go from being, random onlookers to viable prospects for our practice. At that point, we've done the first phase of our marketing plan, which is called attract. The second phase of our marketing plan is about conversion, right? Now, in the medical aesthetic space, and there's kind of two conversions that have to go one after the other. So the first is we have to get someone to convert from, again, being a lead to actually booking a consultation. That's our first conversion. And then again, we have to book that consultation to a finalized procedure on the calendar. So there's really two conversions that have to take place. Now, the conversion phase is often, where practices get kind of caught up. Some do it well, others don't, but they're doing it to some extent, as well as the attraction phase. The engagement phase, which is what I talked about a moment ago with that automation, that is really where we are able to build relationships and automate. And sadly, the vast majority of practices do little to none of this, right? So during a consultation, whether someone says yes and they become a patient, whether they say they need to think about a treatment and they want to get back to you, or whether they say, this isn't a fit for me right now. In all three of those scenarios, we want to follow up with them in a very specific way so that we can make sure we don't lose that lead. So we can make sure that we build a relationship with them. So if they say yes, we engage them to leave reviews and become loyal returning patients and send their friends. If they say they're unsure, that's okay too. We just want to schedule a follow-up, automate some of that follow-up process, and continue educating that patient so that when they are ready, they come back to you and not a competitor. And even if they say no, that's okay too, but we want to have a way to really follow up with them long term. So that way, if they are looking for another procedure in 6, 12, 18 months, or someone they know is, you're still top of mind, even though they said no during that initial consultation. So at a glance, these are the three phases of your marketing plan. And just to give you a little bit more insight into this buyer's journey, right? There's really three phases that are closely related to marketing when it comes to what's going on in a patient's head, what their psychology is throughout the process of, looking for an aesthetic treatment, right? So the first is awareness. This is where they know, they have some kind of condition, whether it is, again, acne scars, hyperpigmentation, whether it's wrinkles or sagging skin, or maybe it's something with their body, like they've lost a substantial amount of weight, right? The first phase in any particular patient's journey is awareness, right? They know and understand what their problem is. For example, forehead wrinkles, acne scars, but they don't know what the solutions are that can really remedy this for them. So this is what we call awareness. And our goal at this point in the picture is to really educate them about the condition and the potential solutions, right? And some things you can do in your marketing for that are encouraging them to read blog posts. If you have some really great patient guides on your website, inviting them to download that. And if you have patient testimonials on your website or any kind of social proof, as we call it in the world of marketing, really encouraging them to review that as well. So that's the awareness phase. Your patient knows they have a problem, but they don't necessarily know what the solutions are. The next phase is consideration, right? So at this point in time, your patient understands to some extent what the solutions are at their disposal, right? Again, say they're looking for skin tightening. They know there's both lasers, radio frequency, and ultrasound, right? But they don't know the difference or where they want to go. So they're considering the various options that are available to them, right? So at this point in the patient's journey, we really want to distinguish your practice and demonstrate the unique value that you bring to the table through those procedures and treatments that you offer, right? So some ways we can do this are, again, leveraging any kind of social proof or reviews we have on your website. If you have, patient stories and testimonials about a specific condition, encouraging them to read those. And of course, for those of you in the United States, if you have before and after galleries on your website, perfect opportunity to really showcase your work, help them understand the amazing transformations you're able to deliver to your patients. So that's the before and after gallery. And those are all great ways to really drive action and move a patient forward in their journey during the second phase, which again we call consideration. The third phase is really decision time, right? So at this point, the patient has decided what procedure they want for the condition they have, and they're just looking at various options as far as providers go, right? So our goal here is to really drive action and become the patient's first choice, right? So this is the perfect time to invite patients to events. It's the perfect time to invite them to schedule a consultation. Perfect time to invite them to give your office a call to answer any questions they might have, right? So at every phase in the patient's journey, there are specific things we should be doing. And we want to remember that only about 3% of patients at any given time are in the decision phase. The other 97%, about 30% are in the consideration phase, and about 67% are in the awareness phase, depending what study and what metric you reference. But ultimately, most marketing companies and most marketers are only really targeting that 3% of patients and leaving the other 97% of patients in the awareness and consideration phases uncommunicated with, right? So we really want to be very comprehensive in how we go about your marketing. Now, another thing to consider when you're planning your marketing calendar and your marketing time is your patient acquisition cost, and you want to know it by each marketing activity. So let me give you an example. If you spend $1,000 on Facebook ads and you get 100 leads to your practice for that $1,000 ad spend, your acquisition cost is $10 for Facebook ads, right? $1,000 ad spend based on 100 leads works out to $10 a lead. So you want to know your patient acquisition cost by each marketing channel. And you also want to consider, what would it be worth to you to develop a strategic campaign that might allow you to reduce your marketing spend by 10%, because when everything is done strategically, it converts so much better, right? Or it saves you the time investment and the frustration of just trying things and not knowing what works. and really look at the value of each of your patients in terms of what they spend and determine what it would be worth if we had a campaign in place to retain or acquire 5 additional patients a month, or maybe even 10 additional patients a month, maybe even 100 a month, right? I don't know the size of all of your practices and what your current traction looks like, but know the value of your patient in terms of what they spend with you, and then determine the worth of really a strategic marketing campaign so you can set your marketing budget accordingly. So those are just some really important things to consider based on what we've talked about today in this quick little planning webinar. Perfect. So again, what did we talk about today? I want to summarize it all for you. We want to make sure that you are a brand and never a commodity. We want to make sure that you are ultimately selling an outcome and selling the value that your practice offers rather than any one specific procedure or treatment. We want to think strategically about your marketing. And again, we're going to cover that in detail over the next 7 days. So, not to worry about that. We want to help you define quantifiable objectives. We want to help you make sure you understand the phases of your patient journey, right? Awareness, consideration, and decision. And then we want to look at attraction, conversion, and engagement as 3 distinct phases in your marketing plan and how we really find the best channels to do that. And we're going to talk more about that in future webinars as well. So again, tomorrow's webinar is going to be on Wednesday, June 19th at our same time, 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern. And we're going to be talking all about how you can make your competition irrelevant with positioning and patient experience. So a very, very exciting topic. Really looking forward to sharing that content with all of you as well. So again, I did want to make sure I kept my promise and gave you your gift for today. And that is, again, your free copy of my book, Now the Patient Will See You. And you can get that at www.getadamsbook.com. And as I mentioned, that is, of course, completely complimentary. So you can take that as a really helpful resource to share with your entire team as you look to improve your marketing. So that's everything I wanted to share with you all today. I'm really excited to be hopping on tomorrow's webinar all about positioning and patient experience. We will see you then, and I hope you all have a great day. Thanks so much for joining us today.